Welcome into another special edition of Inside Carolina Podcast, North Carolina Football Spring Practice Update. Today, recording this on April 9th. I am Tommy Ashley. We're sponsored by Johnny T-Shirt. That's Jason Staples. And you know what a football show means? Football show means we're going to talk about football. Check out the video, Jason. I know you like this one.
You think you know North Carolina? It's not just the Smoky Mountains and the Old Well. This is Kenan Stadium, where the Jordan Fly Elite game ball makes its debut and its homecoming. Born to fly, built for Carolina, snag your Carolina blue today.
You know what would be cool? If they had this at Practice Like a Pro on Saturday at 6:30 p.m. in the Kenan Stadium, if they had them for sale. Probably won't. Carolina will probably be using them. I saw them in the social media videos they had, and you can get it at BigGameUSA. The link is in the description. It's a good football. Jason talked about the football last time we did a show. It's good football. It fits in your hands well, and it just looks cool. And it can be part of your collection, the official game ball of North Carolina from BigGameUSA. Jason, let's get into why we are here. North Carolina is cruising towards the end of spring practice. They have I guess two more, one of which being the Practice Like a Pro that is open to the public in Kenan Stadium. We'll preview that in just a second, but for all accounts, Jason, we can agree that as we've gone through this has been the most physical, the most competitive, and the most different spring practice in Chapel Hill in quite some time under Bill Belichick and his staff. I think universally they've said it has been more competitive and more intense than at least in the recent past. But your thoughts on what you've heard over the last few weeks?
Yeah, I mean, some of the news coming out of the coaching clinic practices and so on. The primary thing is just the attention to detail on things like inside run drill, which is music to my ears, and the overall level of physicality in practice. That, you know, the offense, they're trying to really emphasize running the football down the defense's throat, and the defense is actually bowing up and showing a pulse against the run. Now, and we don't want to say too much here, but you know full well that both of us have heard and seen some evidence that there's still room to grow, we'll say, on the offensive line. They still have some work to do to be anywhere near where they want to be. I think if you put truth serum into the coaching staff and ask them, whether they were satisfied or that, the guys that they picked up on that side as a whole have lived up to their hopes and expectations, I think the answer would be no. And I think they're still going to probably be in the market to continue to improve there. And defensively, they just still need dudes. But the thing that's been interesting is that the real sort of buzz coming out of all this so far has been that the defensive line and linebackers have mostly gotten the better of the offense. Now, we talked about that already a little bit. Some of that is due to just the nature of spring practice, and defense eventually cheats and all that. But not all of it's due to that. And you got guys that have actually played well on that side of the ball. And, I mean, here's the thing. Let's be honest. How often in the last 3-4 years have we heard that the defense or defensive line was getting out there and eating in practice? It wasn't that often. Even though they had players, they were giving up runs in practice. I mean, every time we went to an open practice, how many times did we see running backs with some open run lanes into the second level?
Pretty Absolutely.
Frequently. And that's just a consequence of just not getting it done up front, even though they had that talent. I think one thing that has been real clear so far is that they are going to be physical up front, and if nothing else, they're going to fight and claw again to stop the run. So, I'm curious to see what happens when they do go against teams that feel better about their offensive line. But I mean, all in all, it's not too bad to get a little bit more positive report, I think, about the defensive line than what we expected at this stage.
Yeah, I mean, it's clear that this team is going to they are gearing this team to win tight football games and to win low-scoring football games. It's not going to be shootout central. It's not going to be don't leave your seat, you might miss a touchdown type football. I do not think under Bill Belichick and his staff. I mean, we've heard, and if folks can refer back to the scoop we posted on Tar Pit Premium message board middle of last week, there's some plays to be had by the running backs. But I've heard the word destroyed used several times when discussing the defensive line going against the offensive line and doing the destroying on the offensive line. A lot of cross training going on the offensive line, a lot of trying to, and we've talked about this and we talk about it all the time, putting the puzzle pieces together in the way that the picture looks the best. You'd like to, and Jason, I want your thoughts on this. You'd like to put them in the way the players like it the best and the players prefer it. Maybe the players project further down the road, but as a college football coach, you have to put them in the way they look the best for your team on that day in that season. And I think we've seen a lot of that. It's all about getting the best 5 on the field, one way or another, when we're talking offensive line, and the best 11 on the field overall. But that is a challenge. I mean, for a coaching staff, Jason, unless you have 5-star dudes at every position, it is a challenge to get the mix tuned perfectly. That's what spring practice is for. That's what fall camp will be for, to get it tuned to look the best when TCU comes to town in late August.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And, you look at, even if you do have 5-star talent, you're still going to have to figure out which guys fit best where. And, that's been a lot of this. The really hard part, just going off of reports, going off of various, things that kind of come to us from the grapevine on this. And even for coaches, it's hard to evaluate. The thing is, the thing that's tricky about spring practice is sometimes it's hard to tell whether or not the defensive line is starting to show signs of life and really starting to be encouraging because the guys that they're going against on the other side, that unit's just not good enough. Or maybe that unit is about what you kind of expected it to be and the defensive line is just better. Which one is it? Is one just worse or is the other one better? Or, is it some mixture of the two? That's something that's really hard to evaluate. And that's something that actually, when you watch it with your eyes, and that's something I'm looking forward to evaluating when it comes time to go to the practice like a pro event. That's one of the things I want to see. I want to be able to see with my eyes. Okay, is that guy beating the offensive lineman that's across from him because of bad technique or bad footwork or just bad something on the offensive side, or are we seeing guys winning legit battles with guys that look like they belong at the ACC level? We don't really know that yet. I'm not sure that the coaching staff entirely knows that yet. Because, you only see your guys against your guys. And, sometimes it can be a little deceptive. But that's one of the things that I think we're going to do our best to evaluate coming up. And so far, like I said, the buzz is just that the defense is a little bit ahead or pretty significantly ahead and that the offense has had some trouble blocking them a good bit of the time in spring, which is not that uncommon, but you want to see, I think the offensive line in terms of raw talent, on paper talent, physical traits talent might be a little ahead of what it might be a little bit better than the defensive line. And if they're getting handled, it's just a matter of determining why. And what's actually happening.
Absolutely. The age-old spring ball question is, do we just suck on one side of the line or are they really good? And you never know until you get into live action in the games. We'll see that. But we'll get opportunity to see them up close on Saturday, 6:30 in Kenan Stadium at the Practice Like the Pro. You mentioned that. Obviously, quarterback. I think we settle on this, and let me back up here. Quarterback, offensive line, defensive line are the 3 key spots for this team to be good and be successful. A lot of people have asked about wide receivers. To be honest, I haven't heard a lot about the wide receivers. I saw the ship mic'd up thing. I haven't either. And the assumption is either they're really good keeping it under wraps or nobody talks about them because they're really good and they're doing what they're doing their jobs. We'll find out. The bottom line is receivers, however good they are not going to matter unless you have a quarterback that can get them the ball. And continue to hear that Bryce Baker may have the highest upside, but Ryan Brown is a guy that is catching on and doing some things maybe a little better at this point in practice. If folks watched the Bill Belichick mic'd up section, you saw him working with Bryce Baker a fair amount. But Jason, that's what I want to see. And if they do some 11-on-11 stuff Saturday, is see how these guys react or act in full on, not just 7-on-7 action. Because I've seen Bryce Baker throw in 7-on-7, and he was throwing dimes all over the field. There's a big difference when a 300-pound man's chasing you. But you've got that going on here. What do you want to see from the quarterbacks on Saturday?
Well, I think there's two things. One is with Baker, I think the arm talent, the ability to throw with accuracy to all levels of the field and all that. I don't have any real questions about his ability to do that stuff. For me, with Baker, it's all about getting the ball out quickly enough to the right guy. So at this stage of a young guy's career, the game is still, I would assume, moving 120 miles an hour. And, that line in the middle of the road is just it's a dotted line, but it's solid to him, right? What I want to see is how much have things slowed down for him since the beginning of spring, and is he able to drop back and get on his read quickly enough to get the ball out with reliability? Because if so, then I think that's probably your guy. That's really what's going to determine it for him. Can he get the snap and get the ball out on time to the right guy? That's all it is for him, because the rest of it, he's going to be able to locate the football. He can make all the throws. With the other, it's a little bit different. For him, the question is really consistent accuracy. He's made some big time throws. He made some big time throws at Purdue, just a couple of those. So he's shown that he can do it. But the real question for him, I don't think, is as much the catching up to speed or the decision making is something that's always a matter of you're always having to be careful about. But with Brown, that he can run, that he can make plays with his legs, that if things break down, he can just take off and go. So you're not really evaluating him as much on that aspect in the pocket and some of that. What you're evaluating is, can you get consistent enough accuracy from him to where when he does get the ball out, he's regularly putting it in a catchable spot and not hurting you with misses, not hurting you by putting the ball in danger with misses. Because, a little bit, we saw 13 minutes earlier in the season, right? The one thing we did get to see from the quarterbacks was a little bit of target practice with him. And just even in that little drill we saw, Bryce was a lot more accurate than Brown. Brown just flat out short-armed it and missed a couple trying to aim it. I want to see, is he willing to just let it rip and put the ball in place? And can he be a threat with his arm from the pocket, rather than really being a got to get him outside the pocket or on the move to really be a difference, to be able to play that position and be a good player. So that's really what I want to see from him. Can he win from the pocket? For Baker, it's, can he get the game to slow down enough for himself?
Yeah, and the thing with Baker is under center. They're going to run some under center. That's going to be a difference for him. And you've talked about that on these shows before. The challenge is there, and for Brown, it's to stick in the pocket. To your point, not just run. And we've heard. I've talked to several people that said he will scat quickly, with rather than sticking there and read it and make a throw. So those are things that would be interesting to see on Saturday, and interesting to see the progression from, like you said, what we were able to see, what people have been able to see going forward, and then you get to see it in public on Saturday. We've heard about different players. They remain. I haven't heard anything different than Janai Norwood is doing his job and making moves. Thaddeus Dixon, we've talked about him before in the defensive secondary. On the defensive line, they obviously want more talent there. Offensive line, they're still working for that. Running backs, they're still trying to determine who's behind Davion Gauss, and the tight ends need to get healthy and provide. But Jason, let's dig into the lines. What do we need to see from both sides of the ball there on the lines on Saturday to sort of settle the angst that building from the inside out is going as planned, when clearly it's going to be a work in progress? But how do we see the progress after Saturday? Will we see that there's been progress if what happens?
So one of the things that's probably going to make this difficult is I wouldn't be surprised if we don't see a lot of ones versus twos. So, what I'm hoping is that we can see good on good. And then at that point, my strategy for this is I'm going to find Bo Atkinson. I'm going to find, a couple of the guys on the offensive line, Blasky, some of those guys on the offensive line that have played, that I know how good, I know roughly where they are. I know where they are in the larger process, and I want to see, okay, when that guy goes against that guy who I don't know how good he is, goes against the guy I know how good he is, what happens? Right? So when Bo Atkinson is lined up across from the right tackle, whoever it is, what happens? And if that right tackle shows that he can pass protect against him, all right, now I know that you got a right tackle on the field that you can trust. But if Atkinson just goes right by him, well, okay, now there's cause for concern, right? But what I'm doing is I'm wanting to evaluate where guys fit best based on what I'm seeing, and then how they're competing against the guys that we already kind of know what level they played in the past. Now, beyond that, I also want to see what fundamental what benefits in terms of fundamental improvements have we seen? I think there's less room on the offensive line to grow on that, although you've got a bunch of guys who weren't on last year's roster, so you want to see that. But defensively, how much improvement are you seeing in terms of first and second step, and getting the hands in the correct place, and hand fighting and leverage and all the things that you really want to see from a defensive line? How much are you seeing consistency in the little things in terms of fundamentals? That's another thing I want to look closely at, because that's the thing that this coaching staff really can hang their hat on from day one. And what they've said from day one is on the development and the player, fundamentals and the coaching side of things. And I want to see, okay, how much of a difference has that made through 15 practices or 14 practices? So, and that's something you can see up front pretty fast, because you can see, okay, what's the pad level? Where are the hands? Where are the feet under you? Are you properly hitting your marks with your feet? Are you keeping your feet moving? Are you in the proper gap? Are you pressing the proper gap? Are you eating the double team the correct way if you're that guy? Are you beating your guy one-on-one? Or are you using the correct technique against the specific pass set? Those sorts of things. That's the stuff that I want to look at come Saturday. And I think it'll be pretty revealing. But again, the hard part still is determining how much is it because one side of the ball is bad versus one side of the ball being better than you expect. And we're going to do the best we can to evaluate that. But that's, to me, I'm going to focus the bulk of my attention on the line of scrimmage. And then beyond that, the convenience is that when the quarterback pulls the trigger, you can go from watching the line of scrimmage to seeing where the ball's ending up. And that can show you a lot.
Yeah, that's what I want to see. I mean, I know you and Barnes and the others are line of scrimmage guys. I want to see the quarterback make plays and move the ball and get the ball where it needs to go on time, as you've talked about, to the right guy. Don't put the ball in danger. We always talk about big time throws versus turnover worthy throws. You gotta separate those two out, and I want to see Brown and Baker do that. I want to see Baker be able to run under center. I want to see him run tempo, vary the tempo on offense, and see how the defense reacts to that. And I want to see the physicality of both lines. I want to see this team play physical football. And granted, you don't get a ton of that in spring. Well, they have, but you don't want to see people get hurt in spring, but you want to see the physicality. And I'd like to see some chippiness. One thing that we've talked about and you've talked about a lot is I want to see some fights. We've heard, we're not going to see it on Saturday, I wouldn't think, but we've heard that there have been some, quote, dust ups. And I think that's a good thing. But wrapping up here, Jason, and quite frankly, I hope that everybody will come out and see it with their own eyes on Saturday at the Practice Like a Pro event. After spring practice is over, how do you get better as a team before fall camp starts into July or whenever it is? How does a team get better, a football team get better? I understand how individuals do, but how does the team itself get better from, April 13th to July 30th or whenever practice will officially start practice?
Well, first of all, you make sure that you maximize whatever you can get out of the transfer portal, which is about to open up, right? Transfer portal opens up this week.
And that's going to be back and forth. I mean, that's not going to be just flowing in. That's going to be flowing out.
There's going to be a few guys that are going to leave. And I think there's a few guys that haven't made up their mind yet. I think there's a few guys that'll probably have their minds made up for them based on, how the spring has gone. But you've got to find a few additional pieces to help your roster in this second portal, portal opening. So that's number one. That, we've talked about this for how long. College football still comes down to roster. When your guys are more talented and better than their guys, you're going to win more often than not. So how many guys can you get that are an improvement over the level of talent that you currently have on the roster? That's the number one thing, first and foremost. The second thing, though, really is about so much of this is one of the reasons why it's so valuable for young guys to get in for the spring, for one thing. But over the course of the summer, that's when you're actually spending time as units working on the fundamentals that you tried to emphasize all spring. So you're going out there and wide receivers have a set of drills that you got used to doing in practice every day. And what you do is you go out and you've got your lifting responsibilities, you've got your conditioning responsibilities, and then usually it's going to be in the afternoon or evening, you're going to have your individual skills building and 7-on-7 stuff that's going to be going over the course of the summer. And that's where you get better. That's where you're going through and you're continuing to do the drills and all that you learned over the course of the spring. And you're getting better and you're coaching each other in your seg. And then, like I said, 7-on-7, you're going 1-on-1 against the guys that are doing the same thing on the other side of the ball. And you're calling the plays that you installed in the spring. And you're working on that with the quarterbacks. You're working on that with the tight ends, wide receivers, running backs on offense. The defense is calling their specific coverages. They're doing all that stuff. And they're working together to get that better. And then the idea is that you've repped it that many more times over the course of the summer so that when you get into fall camp, everybody's done all that all summer. They've already gone through all the stuff that you installed. They've already gone through all the techniques the way that the coaches said to do it. And then it's just some quick cleanup and some additional install especially for the new guys, the new arrivals in the fall. But now you're iterating on what you already installed. And now you're actually getting to where, okay, you know what you're supposed to do here. You worked on it all summer after we coached you on it in the spring. Now let's refine this. Let's get a little bit better at it during camp. That's what you're doing. And quarterbacks and receivers, you're getting more and more feel for each other. You're building leadership. You're doing all that stuff over the course of the summer. So that's really what you're doing.
And staying in shape and getting stronger and doing all those things. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, a lot of people talk about buy-in and being all in and all. And I think that's a lot easier when you have coaches on your backs during practice. But in the summertime, when you still have the coaches on you, but it's not as organized maybe, how important is that to have player-led leadership to get these guys together to do the things you're talking about? Because I think that's one thing you lose, I think, with the portal era and the transactional era that is college football. Maybe I'm wrong there. But how important is it to have that leadership, that veteran leadership, buy in completely to a new coaching staff, and then also press everybody, all 85 or 120 or however many people are on the roster to get in, and how important is summer for that aspect of the program, Jason?
So how talented was Florida State's roster last year?
Very, I thought.
They had on paper,
They had enough.
They had some guys. They should not have won 2 games. You know why that team lost all those games? They didn't have leadership. That was a team where if you looked at that team on the offensive side and you were like, who's the leader here? They had a new quarterback who was a transfer in. They had a bunch of new guys in new positions, basically replaced everybody at the skill spots. And then the offensive line, you got a couple guys banged up, but a couple of the guys that were there were not really true leader types. And they just had no leadership on offense. And then you look on defense, and the guys that were sort of in position to be leaders, they weren't that. If anything, they were leading in the wrong direction. And the result? A very talented roster with 2 wins. That's how important this is. On the flip side, we've seen teams, that 2015 North Carolina team, I don't think that's the most talented North Carolina team that we've seen. But they had an awful lot of leadership. I mean, that's where you give Marquise Williams some credit. Give, Hood and some of those guys, TJ Logan, some credit. Some of those offensive linemen on that team, that whole defense had some guys that were leaders, right? So, you look at Stewart and some of those guys. Those were guys that were leaders on that team. And the result, a team that went to the ACC championship and was, at least competitive in the ACC championship game. Was that the second best team by roster in the ACC that year? Probably not. But they played above their record was above their talent level, I think, as a whole. Leadership matters a lot. So, that's a part of it. But this is where a guy like Moses Cabrera is really important. Your strength coach sets the tone of your team. And, I've long been of the view that everybody in the country, or virtually everybody in the country, basically does the same stuff when it comes to the lifts and, the physical part of things. I mean, there aren't lots of different ways to do cleans and deadlifts and squats and bench press and so on. And if you're inventing new ways to do that stuff, you're probably you're not helping your team, right? I mean, I see all these ridiculous workouts that, some of these celebrity trainers have their superstar athletes convinced are better, where you got a guy like balancing on one foot on a Bosu ball and, with chains around him and doing all this other stuff. And he's not actually getting better, but he thinks he is. Physically, that guy isn't actually getting better because the exercise, he's doing snake oil stuff. But here's the flip side to that. The part that matters the most isn't really just the physical stuff. The place where the strength and conditioning coach, I think, has the most impact and the most to really offer a team is on the mental side and the toughness aspect. You develop your toughness in the summer and in the kinds of workouts that you're asked to do in off-season conditioning stuff. You want that to not only build you physically, but to build you in terms of your heart and your toughness. How hard are you going to strain? How hard are you going to press? And you can do the same stuff a little bit better, a little bit harder, and learn to strain and push just a little bit past what everybody else does. And that's where the strength and conditioning coach and his assistants and what you're doing in the summer there can help build that player leadership. Because those guys, when you start fighting through that stuff together, you start to identify who those leaders are, and those leaders step forward. So, and then, to me, that's a big part of what you've got to do this summer. You've got to build that toughness and continue to do that over the summer. And a lot of that's on Cabrera.
Yeah, and it's on the players too. If you want player-led ownership, it becomes a thing in the summertime after spring practice ends on April 12th. And North Carolina will have a practice like a pro day, 6:30 in Kenan Stadium. No excuses not to be there. If you're within earshot of Chapel Hill, get in there. The whole Inside Carolina crew will be there covering it. Jason and I will do some analysis after it. There's also a baseball game earlier that day. You can check out that in Boshammer Stadium against Wake Forest. There's just a ton going on Chapel Hill. It's a great time to be in Chapel Hill, and especially if you are a Carolina football person, because you can see it in person. You don't have to hear us tell you about it. You can go see it in person.
And then Tommy, I tell you about it.
And then you can listen to us tell you about what you saw or what you think you saw. It is the wonders of the internet and podcast and all that good stuff. Shout out to Inside Carolina Crowd. Shout out to everybody watching. Shout out to Johnny T-Shirt and Big Game USA. Get your official game ball from Big Game USA. Click on the link in the video. Jason, it's always a pleasure.
Likewise, Tommy.